Chapter 12. I was sitting on the bank, conjuring up this scene to myself, when George remarked that when I was quite rested, perhaps I would not mind helping to wash up, and thus recalled from the days of the glorious past to the prosaic present, with all its misery and sin, I slid down into the boat and cleaned out the frying pan with a stick of wood and a tuft of grass, polishing it up finally with George's wet shirt. We went over to Magna Carta Island and had a look at the stone which stands in the cottage there, and on which the Great Charter is said to have been signed, though as to whether it really was signed there, or, as some say, on the other bank at Runningmead, I decline to commit myself. As far as my own personal opinion goes, however, I am inclined to give weight to the popular island theory. Clearly, had I been one of the barons at the time, I should have strongly urged upon my comrades the advisability of our getting such a slippery customer as King John onto the island, where there was less chance of surprises and tricks. There are the ruins of an old priory in the grounds of Ankerwyke House, which is close to Picnic Point, and it was round about the grounds of this old priory that Henry VIII is said to have waited for and met Anne Boleyn. He also used to meet her at Hever Castle in Kent, and also somewhere near St. Albans. It must have been difficult for the people of England in those days to have found a spot where these thoughtless young folk were not spooning. Have you ever been in a house where there are a couple courting? It is most trying. You think you will go and sit in the drawing-room, and you march off there. As you open the door, you hear a noise as if somebody had suddenly recollected something, and when you get in, Emily is over by the window, full of interest in the opposite side of the road, and your friend, John Edward, is at the other end of the room, with his whole soul held in thrall by photographs of other people's relatives. "Oh," you say, pausing at the door, "I didn't know anybody was here." "Oh, didn't you?" says Emily coldly, in a tone which implies that she does not believe you. You hang about for a bit, then you say, "It's very dark. Why don't you light the gas?" John Edward says, oh, he hadn't noticed it, and Emily says that Papa does not like the gas lit in the afternoon. You tell them one or two items of news, and give them your views and opinions on the Irish question, but this does not appear to interest them. All they remark on any subject is, "Oh, is it? Did he? Yes. And you don't say so." And after 10 minutes of such style of conversation, you edge up to the door and slip out, and are surprised to find that the door immediately closes behind you and shuts itself without your having touched it. Half an hour later, you think you will try a pipe in the conservatory. The only chair in the place is occupied by Emily, and John Edward, if the language of clothes can be relied upon, has evidently been sitting on the floor. They do not speak, but they give you a look that says all that can be said in a civilized community, and you back out promptly and shut the door behind you. You are afraid to poke your nose into any room in the house now, so after walking up and down the stairs for a while, you go and sit in your own bedroom. This becomes uninteresting, however, after a time, and so you put on your hat and stroll out into the garden. You walk down the path, and as you pass the summer house, you glance in, and there are those two young idiots huddled up into one corner of it, and they see you, and are evidently under the idea that for some wicked purpose of your own, you are following them about. "Why don't they have a special room for this sort of thing, and make people keep to it?" you mutter, and you rush back to the hall and get your umbrella, and go out. It must have been much like this when that foolish boy, Henry VIII, was courting his little Anne. People in Buckinghamshire would have come upon them unexpectedly when they were mooning about Windsor and Wraysbury, and have exclaimed, "Oh, you here!" And Henry would have blushed and said, yes, he'd just come over to see a man, and Anne would have said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you. Isn't it funny? I've just met Mr. Henry VIII in the lane, and he's going the same way I am." Then those people would have gone away and said to themselves, "Oh, we'd better get out of here while this billing and cooing is on. We'll go down to Kent." And they would go to Kent, and the first thing they would see in Kent when they got there would be Henry and Anne fooling round Hever Castle. "Oh, drat this," they would have said. "Here, let's go away. I can't stand any more of it. Let's go to St. Albans. Nice, quiet place, St. Albans. And when they reached St. Albans, there would be that wretched couple kissing under the abbey walls. Then these folks would go and be pirates until the marriage was over. From Picnic Point to Old Windsor Lock is a delightful bit of the river. A shady road, dotted here and there with dainty little cottages, runs by the bank up to the Bells of Ouseley, a picturesque inn, as most upriver inns are, and a place where a very good glass of ale may be drunk, so Harris says. And on a matter of this kind you can take Harris's word. Old Windsor is a famous spot in its way. Edward the Confessor had a palace here, and here the great Earl Godwin was proved guilty by the justice of that age of having encompassed the death of the king's brother. Earl Godwin broke a piece of bread and held it in his hand. "If I am guilty," said the Earl, "may this bread choke me when I eat it." Then he put the bread into his mouth and swallowed it, and it choked him, and he died. After you pass Old Windsor, the river is somewhat uninteresting and does not become itself again until you are nearing Boveny. George and I towed up past the Home Park, which stretches along the right bank from Albert to Victoria Bridge, and as we were passing Datchet, George asked me if I remembered our first trip up the river, and when we landed at Datchet at 10 o'clock at night and wanted to go to bed. I answered that I did remember it. It will be some time before I forget it. It was the Saturday before the August bank holiday. We were tired and hungry, we same three, and when we got to Datchet, we took out the hamper, the 2 bags, and the rugs and coats and such like things, and started off to look for diggings. We passed a very pretty little hotel with clematis and creeper over the porch, but there was no honeysuckle about it, and for some reason or other I had got my mind fixed on honeysuckle, and I said, "Oh, don't let's go in there, let's go on a bit further and see if there isn't one with honeysuckle over it." So we went on till we came to another hotel. That was a very nice hotel too, and it had honeysuckle on it round at the side. But Harris did not like the look of a man who was leaning against the front door. He said he didn't look a nice man at all, and he wore ugly boots. So we went on further. We went a goodish way without coming across any more hotels, and then we met a man and asked him to direct us to a few. He said, "Why, you're coming away from them. You must turn right round and go back, and then you will come to the Stag." We said, "Oh, we had been there and didn't like it, no honeysuckle over it." "Well then," he said, "there's the manor house just opposite. Have you tried that?" Harris replied that we did not want to go there, didn't like the looks of a man who was stopping there. Harris did not like the colour of his hair, didn't like his boots either. "Well, I don't know what you'll do, I'm sure," said our informant, "because they're the only 2 inns in the place." "No other inns?" exclaimed Harris. "None," replied the man. "What on earth are we to do?" cried Harris. Then George spoke up. He said Harris and I could get an hotel built for us if we liked, and have some people made to put in. For his part, he was going back to the Stag. The greatest minds never realise their ideals in any matter, and Harris and I sighed over the hollowness of all earthly desires, and followed George. We took our traps into the Stag, and laid them down in the hall. The landlord came up and said, "Good evening, gentlemen." "Oh, good evening," said George. "We want 3 beds, please." "Oh, very sorry, sir," said the landlord, "but I'm afraid we can't manage it." "Oh, well, never mind," said George. 2 will do. 2 of us can sleep in 1 bed, can't we?" he continued, turning to Harris and me. Harris said, "Oh, yes." He thought George and I could sleep in 1 bed very easily. "Oh, very sorry, sir," again repeated the landlord, "but we really haven't got a bed vacant in the whole house. In fact, we are putting 2 and even 3 gentlemen in 1 bed as it is." This staggered us for a bit, but Harris, who was an old traveller, rose to the occasion and, laughing cheerily, said, "Oh, well, we can't help it. We must rough it. You must give us a shakedown in the billiard-room." "Oh, very sorry, sir. 3 gentlemen sleeping on the billiard table already, and 2 in the coffee-room. Can't possibly take you in tonight." We picked up our things and went over to the manor house. It was a pretty little place. I said I thought I should like it better than the other house, and Harris said, "Oh, yes, it would be all right, and we needn't look at the man with the red hair. Besides, the poor fellow couldn't help having red hair." Harris spoke quite kindly and sensibly about it. The people at the manor house did not wait to hear us talk. The landlady met us on the doorstep with the greeting that we were the 14th party she had turned away within the last hour and a half. As for our meek suggestions of stables, billiard-room, or coal cellars, she laughed them all to scorn. All these nooks had been snatched up long ago. Did she know of any place in the whole village where we could get shelter for the night? Well, if we didn't mind roughing it, she did not recommend it, mind, but there was a little beer shop half a mile down the Eton Road. We waited to hear no more. We caught up the hamper and the bags and the coats and rugs and parcels, and ran. The distance seemed more like a mile than half a mile, but we reached the place at last and rushed, panting, into the bar. The people at the beer shop were rude. They merely laughed at us. There were only 3 beds in the whole house, and they had 7 single gentlemen and 2 married couples sleeping there already. A kind-hearted bargeman, however, who happened to be in the tap-room, thought we might try the grocer's next door to the Stag, and we went back. The grocer's was full. An old woman we met in the shop then kindly took us along with her for a quarter of a mile to a lady friend of hers who occasionally let rooms to gentlemen. This old woman walked very slowly, and we were 20 minutes getting to her lady friends. She enlivened the journey by describing to us, as we trailed along, the various pains she had in her back. Her lady friends' rooms were let. From there we were recommended to number 27. Number 27 was full, and sent us to number 32, and 32 was full. Then we went back into the high road, and Harris sat down on the hamper and said he would go no further. He said it seemed a quiet spot, and he would like to die there. He requested George and me to kiss his mother for him, and to tell all his relations that he forgave them and died happy. At that moment, an angel came by in the disguise of a small boy. I cannot think of any more effective disguise an angel could have assumed, with a can of beer in one hand, and in the other something at the end of a string, which he let down onto every flat stone he came across, and then pulled up again, this producing a peculiarly unattractive sound, suggestive of suffering. We asked this heavenly messenger, as we discovered him afterwards to be, if he knew of any lonely house whose occupants were few and feeble, old ladies or paralysed gentlemen preferred, who could be easily frightened into giving up their beds for the night to 3 desperate men. Or, if not this, could he recommend us to an empty pigsty, or a disused lime kiln, or anything of that sort? He did not know of any such place, at least not one handy, but he said that if we liked to come with him, his mother had a room to spare, and could put us up for the night. We fell upon his neck there in the moonlight and blessed him, and it would have made a very beautiful picture if the boy himself had not been so overpowered by our emotion as to be unable to sustain himself under it, and sunk to the ground, letting us all down on top of him. Harris was so overcome with joy that he fainted, and had to seize the boy's beer can and half empty it before he could recover consciousness. And then he started off at a run, and left George and me to bring on the luggage. It was a little 4-roomed cottage where the boy lived, and his mother, good soul, gave us hot bacon for supper, and we ate it all, 5 pounds, and a jam tart afterwards, and 2 pots of tea. And then we went to bed. There were 2 beds in the room. One was a 2-foot 6-inch truckle bed, and George and I slept in that, and kept in by tying ourselves together with a sheet. And the other was the little boy's bed, and Harris had that all to himself, and we found him in the morning with 2 feet of bare leg sticking out at the bottom, and George and I used it to hang the towels on while we bathed. We were not so uppish about what sort of hotel we would have next time we went to Datchet. To return to our present trip, nothing exciting happened, and we tugged steadily on to a little below Monkey Island, where we drew up and lunched. We tackled the cold beef for lunch, and then we found we had forgotten to bring any mustard. I don't think I ever in my life, before or since, felt I wanted mustard as badly as I felt I wanted it then. I don't care for mustard as a rule, and it is very seldom that I take it at all, but I would have given worlds for it then. I don't know how many worlds there may be in the universe, but anyone who had brought me a spoonful of mustard at that precise moment could have had them all. I grow reckless like that when I want a thing and can't get it. Harris said he would have given worlds for mustard too. It would have been a good thing for anybody who had come up to that spot with a can of mustard then. He would have been set up in worlds for the rest of his life. But there, I dare say both Harris and I would have tried to break out of the bargain after we had got the mustard. One makes these extravagant offers in moments of excitement, but of course, when one comes to think of it, one sees how absurdly out of proportion they are with the value of the required article. I heard a man going up a mountain in Switzerland once say he would give worlds for a glass of beer, and when he came to a little shanty where they kept it, he kicked up a most fearful row because they charged him 5 francs for a bottle of Bass. He said it was a scandalous imposition, and he wrote to the Times about it. It cast a gloom over the boat, there being no mustard. We ate our beef in silence. Existence seemed hollow and uninteresting. We thought of the happy days of childhood and sighed. We brightened up a bit, however, over the apple tart, and when George drew out a tin of pineapple from the bottom of the hamper and rolled it into the middle of the boat, we felt that life was worth living after all. We are very fond of pineapple, all 3 of us. We looked at the picture on the tin. We thought of the juice. We smiled at one another, and Harris got a spoon ready. Then we looked for the knife to open the tin with. We turned out everything in the hamper. We turned out the bags. We pulled up the boards at the bottom of the boat. We took everything out onto the bank and shook it. There was no tin opener to be found. Then Harris tried to open the tin with a pocket knife, and broke the knife and cut himself badly, and George tried a pair of scissors, and the scissors flew up and nearly put his eye out. While they were dressing their wounds, I tried to make a hole in the thing with the spiky end of the hitcher, and the hitcher slipped and jerked me out between the boat and the bank into 2 feet of muddy water, and the tin rolled over uninjured and broke a teacup. Then we all got mad. We took that tin out on the bank, and Harris went up into a field and got a big sharp stone, and I went back into the boat and brought out the mast, and George held the tin and Harris held the sharp end of his stone against the top of it, and I took the mast and poised it high up in the air and gathered up all my strength and brought it down. It was George's straw hat that saved his life that day. He keeps that hat now, what is left of it, and of a winter's evening, when the pipes are lit and the boys are telling stretchers about the dangers they have passed through, George brings it down and shows it round, and the stirring tale is told anew, with fresh exaggerations every time. Harris got off with merely a flesh wound. After that I took the tin off myself and hammered at it with the mast till I was worn out and sick at heart, whereupon Harris took it in hand. We beat it out flat. We beat it back square. We battered it into every form known to geometry, but we could not make a hole in it. Then George went at it and knocked it into a shape so strange, so weird, so unearthly in its wild hideousness that he got frightened and threw away the mast. Then we all 3 sat round it on the grass and looked at it. There was one great dent across the top that had the appearance of a mocking grin, and it drove us furious, so that Harris rushed at the thing and caught it up and flung it far into the middle of the river, and as it sank we hurled our curses at it, and we got into the boat and rowed away from the spot, and never paused till we reached Maidenhead. Maidenhead itself is too snobby to be pleasant. It is the haunt of the River Swell and his overdressed female companion. It is the town of showy hotels patronised chiefly by dudes and ballet girls. It is the witch's kitchen from which go forth those demons of the river, steam launches. The London Journal Duke always has his little place at Maidenhead, and the heroine of the 3-volume novel always dines there when she goes out on a spree with somebody else's husband. We went through Maidenhead quickly, and then eased up and took leisurely that grand reach beyond Bolters and Cookham locks. Clifton Woods still wore their dainty dress of spring and rose up from the water's edge in one long harmony of blended shades of fairy green. In its unbroken loveliness, this is perhaps the sweetest stretch of all the river, and lingeringly we slowly drew our little boat away from its deep peace. We pulled up in the backwater just below Cookham and had tea, and when we were through the lock, it was evening. A stiffish breeze had sprung up, in our favour for a wonder, for as a rule on the river the wind is always dead against you, whatever way you go. It is against you in the morning when you start for a day's trip, and you pull a long distance thinking how easy it will be to come back with the sail. Then after tea the wind veers round, and you have to pull hard in its teeth all the way home. When you forget to take the sail at all, then the wind is consistently in your favour both ways. But there, this world is only a probation, and man was born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. This evening, however, they had evidently made a mistake, and had put the wind round at our back instead of in our face. We kept very quiet about it, and got the sail up quickly before they found it out, and then we spread ourselves about the boat in thoughtful attitudes, and the sail bellied out and strained and grumbled at the mast, and the boat flew. I steered. There is no more thrilling sensation I know of than sailing. It comes as near to flying as man has got to yet, except in dreams. The wings of the rushing wind seem to be bearing you onward you know not where. You are no longer the slow, plodding, puny thing of clay, creeping tortuously upon the ground. You are a part of nature. Your heart is throbbing against hers. Her glorious arms are round you, raising you up against her heart. Your spirit is at one with hers. Your limbs grow light. The voices of the air are singing to you. The earth seems far away and little, and the clouds so close above your head are brothers, and you stretch your arms to them. We had the river to ourselves, except that far in the distance we could see a fishing punt, moored in mid-stream, on which 3 fishermen sat, and we skimmed over the water and past the wooded banks, and no one spoke. I was steering. As we drew nearer, we could see that the 3 men fishing seemed old and solemn-looking men. They sat on 3 chairs in the punt and watched intently their lines, and the red sunset threw a mystic light upon the waters and tinged with fire the towering woods and made a golden glory of the piled-up clouds. It was an hour of deep enchantment, of ecstatic hope and longing. The little sail stood out against the purple sky. The gloaming lay around us, wrapping the world in rainbow shadows. And behind us crept the night. We seemed like knights of some old legend, sailing across some mystic lake into the unknown realm of twilight, unto the great land of the sunset. We did not go into the realm of twilight. We went slap into that punt where those 3 old men were fishing. We did not know what had happened at first, because the sail shut out the view, but from the nature of the language that rose up upon the evening air, we gathered that we had come into the neighbourhood of human beings, and that they were vexed and discontented. Harris let the sail down, and then we saw what had happened. We had knocked those 3 old gentlemen off their chairs into a general heap at the bottom of the boat, and they were now slowly and painfully sorting themselves out from each other and picking fish off themselves, and as they worked, they cursed us, not with a common cursory curse, but with long, carefully thought-out, comprehensive curses that embraced the whole of our career and went away into the distant future and included all our relations and covered everything connected with us, good, substantial curses. Harris told them they ought to be grateful for a little excitement, sitting there fishing all day, and he also said that he was shocked and grieved to hear men their age give way to temper so. But it did not do any good. George said he would steer after that. He said a mind like mine ought not to be expected to give itself away in steering boats. Better let a mere commonplace human being see after that boat before we jolly well all got drowned. And he took the lines and brought us up to Marlow. And at Marlow we left the boat by the bridge and went and put up for the night at the Crown. Chapter 13. Marlow is one of the pleasantest river centres I know of. It is a bustling, lively little town, not very picturesque on the whole, it is true, but there are many quaint nooks and corners to be found in it, nevertheless. Standing arches in the shattered bridge of time, over which our fancy travels back to the days when Marlow Manor owned Saxon Algar for its lord, ere conquering William seized it to give to Queen Matilda, ere it passed to the Earls of Warwick, or to the worldly wise Lord Paget, the counsellor of 4 successive sovereigns. There is lovely country round about it too, if, after boating, you are fond of a walk, while the river itself is at its best here. Down to Cookham, past the quarry woods and the meadows, is a lovely reach. Dear old quarry woods, with your narrow climbing paths and little winding glades, how scented to this hour you seem with memories of sunny summer days. How haunted are your shadowy vistas with the ghosts of laughing faces. How from your whispering leaves there softly fall the voices of long ago. From Marlow up to Sonning is even fairer yet. Grand old Bisham Abbey, whose stone walls have rung to the shouts of the Knights Templars, and which at one time was the home of Anne of Cleves, and at another of Queen Elizabeth, is passed on the right bank just half a mile above Marlow Bridge. Bisham Abbey is rich in melodramatic properties. It contains a tapestry bedchamber and a secret room hid high up in the thick walls. The ghost of the Lady Hoby, who beat her little boy to death, still walks there at night, trying to wash its ghostly hands clean in a ghostly basin. Warwick the Kingmaker rests there, careless now about such trivial things as earthly kings and earthly kingdoms, and Salisbury, who did good service at Poitiers. Just before you come to the abbey, and right on the river's bank, is Bisham Church, and perhaps, if any tombs are worth inspecting, they are the tombs and monuments in Bisham Church. It was while floating in his boat under the Bisham beaches that Shelley, who was then living at Marlow, you can see his house now in West Street, composed The Revolt of Islam. By Hurley Weir, a little higher up, I've often thought that I could stay a month without having sufficient time to drink in all the beauty of the scene. The village of Hurley, 5 minutes' walk from the loch, is as old a little spot as there is on the river, dating, as it does, to quote the quaint phraseology of those dim days, from the times of King Sebert and King Offa. Just past the weir, going up, is Danes' Field, where the invading Danes once encamped during their march to Gloucestershire, and a little further still, nestling by a sweet corner of the stream, is what is left of Medmenham Abbey. The famous Medmenham monks, or Hellfire Club, as they were commonly called, and of whom the notorious Wilkes was a member, were a fraternity whose motto was, "Do as you please," and that invitation still stands over the ruined doorway of the abbey. Many years before this bogus abbey, with its congregation of irreverent jesters, was founded, there stood upon this same spot a monastery of a sterner kind, whose monks were of a somewhat different type to the revellers that were to follow them 500 years afterwards. The Cistercian monks, whose abbey stood there in the 13th century, wore no clothes but rough tunics and cowls, and ate no flesh, nor fish, nor eggs. They lay upon straw, and they rose at midnight to Mass. They spent the day in labour, reading, and prayer, and over all their lives there fell a silence as of death, for no one spoke. A grim fraternity, passing grim lives in that sweet spot that God had made so bright. Strange that nature's voices all around them, the soft singing of the waters, the whisperings of the river grass, the music of the rushing wind, should not have taught them a truer meaning of life than this. They listened there through the long days, in silence, waiting for a voice from heaven, and all day long and through the solemn night it spoke to them in myriad tones, and they heard it not. From Medmenham to sweet Hambledon Loch the river is full of peaceful beauty, but after it passes Greenlands, the rather uninteresting-looking river residence of my newsagent, a quiet, unassuming old gentleman who may often be met with about these regions during the summer months, sculling himself along in easy, vigorous style, or chatting genially to some old lock-keeper as he passes through, until well the other side of Henley it is somewhat bare and dull. We got up tolerably early on the Monday morning at Marlow, and went for a bathe before breakfast, and coming back Montmorency made an awful ass of himself. The only subject on which Montmorency and I have any serious difference of opinion is cats. I like cats. Montmorency does not. When I meet a cat, I say, "Poor pussy," and stoop down and tickle the side of its head, and the cat sticks up its tail in a rigid cast-iron manner, arches its back, and wipes its nose up against my trousers, and all is gentleness and peace. When Montmorency meets a cat, the whole street knows about it, and there is enough bad language wasted in 10 seconds to last an ordinarily respectable man all his life, with care. I do not blame the dog, contenting myself as a rule with merely clouting his head or throwing stones at him, because I take it that it is his nature. Fox terriers are born with about 4 times as much original sin in them as other dogs are, and it will take years and years of patient effort on the part of us Christians to bring about any appreciable reformation in the rowdiness of the fox terrier nature. I remember being in the lobby of the Haymarket stores one day, and all round about me were dogs waiting for the return of their owners, who were shopping inside. There were a mastiff, and 1 or 2 collies, and a St. Bernard, a few retrievers and Newfoundlands, a boarhound, a French poodle with plenty of hair round its head, but mangy about the middle, a bulldog, a few Lowther Arcade sort of animals about the size of rats, and a couple of Yorkshire tykes. There they sat, patient, good, and thoughtful. A solemn peacefulness seemed to reign in that lobby. An air of calmness and resignation, of gentle sadness pervaded the room. Then a sweet young lady entered, leading a meek-looking little fox terrier, and left him chained up there between the bulldog and the poodle. He sat and looked about him for a minute. Then he cast up his eyes to the ceiling, and seemed, judging from his expression, to be thinking of his mother. Then he yawned. Then he looked round at the other dogs, all silent, grave, and dignified. He looked at the bulldog, sleeping dreamlessly, on his right. He looked at the poodle, erect and haughty, on his left. Then, without a word of warning, without the shadow of a provocation, he bit that poodle's near foreleg, and a yelp of agony rang through the quiet shades of that lobby. The result of his first experiment seemed highly satisfactory to him, and he determined to go on and make things lively all round. He sprang over the poodle and vigorously attacked a collie, and the collie woke up and immediately commenced a fierce and noisy contest with the poodle. Then Foxy came back to his own place and caught the bulldog by the ear and tried to throw him away, and the bulldog, a curiously impartial animal, went for everything he could reach, including the hall porter, which gave that dear little terrier the opportunity to enjoy an uninterrupted fight of his own with an equally willing Yorkshire tyke. Anyone who knows canine nature need hardly be told that, by this time, all the other dogs in the place were fighting as if their hearths and homes depended on the fray. The big dogs fought each other indiscriminately, and the little dogs fought among themselves, and filled up their spare time by biting the legs of the big dogs. The whole lobby was a perfect pandemonium, and the din was terrific. A crowd assembled outside in the Haymarket and asked if it was a vestry meeting, or, if not, who was being murdered and why. Men came with poles and ropes and tried to separate the dogs, and the police were sent for. And in the midst of the riot, that sweet young lady returned, and snatched up that sweet little dog of hers. He had laid the tyke up for a month, and had on the expression now of a newborn lamb, into her arms, and kissed him, and asked him if he was killed, and what those great nasty brutes of dogs had been doing to him. And he nestled up against her, and gazed up into her face with a look that seemed to say, "Oh, I'm so glad you've come to take me away from this disgraceful scene." She said that people at the stores had no right to allow great savage things like those other dogs to be put with respectable people's dogs, and that she had a great mind to summon somebody. Such is the nature of fox terriers, and therefore I do not blame Montmorency for his tendency to row with cats. But he wished he had not given way to it that morning. We were, as I have said, returning from a dip, and halfway up the high street a cat darted out from one of the houses in front of us and began to trot across the road. Montmorency gave a cry of joy, the cry of a stern warrior who sees his enemy given over to his hands, the sort of cry Cromwell might have uttered when the Scots came down the hill, and flew after his prey. His victim was a large black tom. I never saw a larger cat, nor a more disreputable-looking cat. It had lost half its tail, one of its ears, and a fairly appreciable proportion of its nose. It was a long, sinewy-looking animal. It had a calm, contented air about it. Montmorency went for that poor cat at the rate of 20 miles an hour, but the cat did not hurry up, did not seem to have grasped the idea that its life was in danger. It trotted quietly on until its would-be assassin was within a yard of it, and then it turned round and sat down in the middle of the road and looked at Montmorency with a gentle, inquiring expression that said, "Yes, you want me?" Montmorency does not lack pluck, but there was something about the look of that cat that might have chilled the heart of the boldest dog. He stopped abruptly and looked back at Tom. Neither spoke, but the conversation that one could imagine was clearly as follows. The cat: "Can I do anything for you?" Montmorency: No, thanks." The cat: "Don't you mind speaking if you really want anything, you know?" Montmorency, backing down the high street: "Oh, no, not at all, certainly. Don't you trouble. I'm afraid I've made a mistake. I thought I knew you. Sorry I disturbed you." The cat: "Not at all. Quite a pleasure. Sure you don't want anything now?" Montmorency, still backing: "Not at all, thanks, not at all. Very kind of you. Good morning." The cat: "Good morning." Then the cat rose and continued his trot, and Montmorency, fitting what he calls his tail carefully into its groove, came back to us and took up an unimportant position in the rear. To this day, if you say the word "cats" to Montmorency, he will visibly shrink and look up piteously at you, as if to say, "Please don't." We did our marketing after breakfast, and revictualled the boat for 3 days. George said we ought to take vegetables, that it was unhealthy not to eat vegetables. He said they were easy enough to cook, and that he would see to that. So we got 10 pounds of potatoes, a bushel of peas, and a few cabbages. We got a beefsteak pie, a couple of gooseberry tarts, and a leg of mutton from the hotel, and fruit and cakes and bread and butter and jam and bacon and eggs and other things we foraged round about the town for. Our departure from Marlow I regard as one of our greatest successes. It was dignified and impressive, without being ostentatious. We had insisted at all the shops we had been to that the things should be sent with us then and there. None of your, "Oh, yes, sir, I will send them off at once. The boy will be down there before you are, sir," and then fooling about on the landing stage and going back to the shop twice to have a row about them, for us. We waited while the basket was packed, and took the boy with us. We went to a good many shops, adopting this principle at each one, and the consequence was that by the time we had finished, we had as fine a collection of boys with baskets following us around as heart could desire, and our final march down the middle of the high street to the river must have been as imposing a spectacle as Marlow had seen for many a long day. The order of the procession was as follows: Montmorency carrying a stick, two disreputable-looking curs, friends of Montmorency's. George carrying coats and rugs and smoking a short pipe. Harris trying to walk with easy grace while carrying a bulged-out Gladstone bag in one hand and a bottle of lime juice in the other. Greengrocer's boy and baker's boy with baskets. Boots from the hotel carrying hamper. Confectioner's boy with basket. Grocer's boy with basket. Long-haired dog. Cheesemonger's boy with basket. Odd man carrying a bag. Bosom companion of odd man with his hands in his pockets, smoking a short clay. Fruiterer's boy with basket. Myself carrying 3 hats and a pair of boots and trying to look as if I didn't know it. 6 small boys and 4 stray dogs. When we got down to the landing stage, the boatman said, "Oh, let me see, sir, was yours a steam launch or a houseboat?" On our informing him it was a double-sculling skiff, he seemed surprised. We had a good deal of trouble with steam launches that morning. It was just before the Henley week, and they were going up in large numbers, some by themselves, some towing houseboats. I do hate steam launches. I suppose every rowing man does. I never see a steam launch, but I feel I should like to lure it to a lonely part of the river, and there, in the silence and the solitude, strangle it. There is a blatant bumptiousness about a steam launch that has the knack of rousing every evil instinct in my nature, and I yearn for the good old days when you could go about and tell people what you thought of them with a hatchet and a bow and arrows. The expression on the face of the man who, with his hands in his pockets, stands by the stern smoking a cigar is sufficient to excuse a breach of the peace by itself, and the lordly whistle for you to get out of the way would, I'm confident, ensure a verdict of justifiable homicide from any jury of rivermen. They used to have to whistle for us to get out of their way. If I may do so without appearing boastful, I think I can honestly say that our one small boat during that week caused more annoyance and delay and aggravation to the steam launches that we came across than all the other craft on the river put together. "Steam launch coming!" one of us would cry out on sighting the enemy in the distance, and in an instant everything was got ready to receive her. I would take the lines, and Harris and George would sit down beside me, all of us with our backs to the launch, and the boat would drift out quietly into midstream. On would come the launch, whistling, and on we would go, drifting. At about 100 yards off, she would start whistling like mad, and the people would come and lean over the side and roar at us. But we never heard them. Harris would be telling us an anecdote about his mother, and George and I would not have missed a word of it for worlds. Then that launch would give one final shriek of a whistle that would nearly burst the boiler, and she would reverse her engines and blow off steam and swing round and get aground. Everyone on board of it would rush to the bow and yell at us, and the people on the bank would stand and shout to us, and all the other passing boats would stop and join in, till the whole river for miles up and down was in a state of frantic commotion. And then Harris would break off in the most interesting part of his narrative, and look up with mild surprise, and say to George, "Why, George, bless me, if here isn't a steam launch." And George would answer, "Well, do you know, I thought I heard something." Upon which we would get nervous and confused, and not know how to get the boat out of the way, and the people in the launch would crowd round us and instruct us. "Pull your right, you idiot! Back with your left! No, not you, the other one! Leave the lines alone, can't you? Now, both together, not that way! Oh, you—" Then they would lower a boat and come to our assistance, and after a quarter of an hour's effort would get us clean out of their way, so that they could go on, and we would thank them so much, and ask them to give us a tow. But they never would. Another good way we discovered of irritating the aristocratic type of steam launch was to mistake them for a bean feast, and ask if they were Messrs. Cubit's lot, or the Bermondsey Good Templars, and could they lend us a saucepan. Old ladies, not accustomed to the river, are always intensely nervous of steam launches. I remember going up once from Staines to Windsor, a stretch of water peculiarly rich in these mechanical monstrosities, with a party containing 3 ladies of this description. It was very exciting. At the first glimpse of every steam launch that came in view, they insisted on landing and sitting down on the bank until it was out of sight again. They said they were very sorry, but that they owed it to their families not to be foolhardy. We found ourselves short of water at Hambledon Lock, so we took our jar and went up to the lock-keeper's house to beg for some. George was our spokesman. He put on a winning smile and said, "Oh, please, could you spare us a little water?"
"Oh, certainly," replied the old gentleman. "Take as much as you want and leave the rest."
"Oh, thank you so much," murmured George, looking about him. Where do you keep it?"
"It's always in the same place, my boy," was the stolid reply. "Just behind you."
"I don't see it," said George, turning round.
"Why, bless us, where's your eyes?"
was the man's comment as he twisted George round and pointed up and down the stream.
"There's enough of it to see, ain't there?"
"Oh," exclaimed George, grasping the idea. "But we can't drink the river, you know."
"No, but you can drink some of it," replied the old fellow. "It's what I've drunk for the last 15 years.
George told him that his appearance after the course did not seem a sufficiently good advertisement for the brand, and that he would prefer it out of a pump. We got some from a cottage a little higher up. I dare say that was only river water, if we had known, but we did not know, so it was all right. What the eye does not see, the stomach does not get upset over. We tried river water once, later on in the season, but it was not a success. We were coming downstream and had pulled up to have tea in a backwater near Windsor. Our jar was empty, and it was a case of going without our tea or taking water from the river. Harris was for chancing it. He said it must be all right if we boiled the water. He said that the various germs of poison present in the water would be killed by the boiling. So we filled our kettle with Thames backwater and boiled it, and very careful we were to see that it did boil. We had made the tea, and were just settling down comfortably to drink it, when George, with his cup halfway to his lips, paused and exclaimed, "What's that?"
"What's what?"
asked Harris and I. "Why, that," said George, looking westward. Harris and I followed his gaze, and saw, coming down towards us on the sluggish current, a dog. It was one of the quietest and peacefulest dogs I have ever seen. I never met a dog who seemed more contented, more easy in its mind. It was floating dreamily on its back, with its forelegs stuck up straight into the air. It was what I should call a full-bodied dog, with a well-developed chest. On he came, serene, dignified and calm, until he was abreast of our boat, and there, among the rushes, he eased up and settled down cosily for the evening. George said he didn't want any tea, and emptied his cup into the water. Harris did not feel thirsty either, and followed suit. I had drunk half mine, but wished I had not. I asked George if he thought I was likely to have typhoid. He said, "Oh, no, he thought I had a very good chance indeed of escaping it. Anyhow, I should know in about a fortnight whether I had or had not." We went up the backwater to Wargrave. It is a short cut leading out of the right-hand bank about half a mile above Marsh Lock, and is well worth taking, being a pretty shady little piece of stream, besides saving nearly half a mile of distance. Of course, its entrance is studded with posts and chains, and surrounded with notice boards menacing all kinds of torture, imprisonment, and death to everyone who dares set skull upon its waters. I wonder some of these riparian boors don't claim the air of the river, and threaten everyone with 40 shillings fine who breathes it. But the posts and chains a little skill will easily avoid. And as for the boards, you might, if you have 5 minutes to spare, and there is nobody about, take 1 or 2 of them down, and throw them into the river. Halfway up the backwater, we got out and lunched, and it was during this lunch that George and I received rather a trying shock. Harris received a shock too, but I do not think Harris's shock could have been anything like so bad as the shock that George and I had over the business. You see, it was in this way. We were sitting in a meadow about 10 yards from the water's edge, and we had just settled down comfortably to feed. Harris had the beefsteak pie between his knees and was carving it, and George and I were waiting with our plates ready.
"Have you got a spoon there?" says Harris. "I want a spoon to help the gravy with."
The hamper was close behind us, and George and I both turned round to reach one out. We were not 5 seconds getting it. When we looked round again, Harris and the pie were gone. It was a wide, open field. There was not a tree or a bit of hedge for hundreds of yards. He could not have tumbled into the river, because we were on the water side of him, and he would have had to climb over us to do it. George and I gazed all about. Then we gazed at each other. "Has he been snatched up to heaven?" I queried. "They'd hardly have taken the pie, too," said George. There seemed weight in this objection, and we discarded the heavenly theory. "I suppose the truth of the matter is," suggested George, descending to the commonplace and practicable, "that there has been an earthquake." And then he added, with a touch of sadness in his voice, "I wish he hadn't been carving that pie." With a sigh, we turned our eyes once more towards the spot where Harris and the pie had last been seen on earth. And there, as our blood froze in our veins and our hair stood up on end, we saw Harris's head, and nothing but his head, sticking bolt upright among the tall grass, the face very red, and bearing upon it an expression of great indignation. George was the first to recover. "Speak," he cried, "and tell us whether you are alive or dead, and where is the rest of you?"
"Oh, don't be a stupid ass," said Harris's head. "I believe you did it on purpose."
"Did what?" exclaimed George and I.
"Why, put me to sit here, darn silly trick. Here, catch hold of the pie."
And out of the middle of the earth, as it seemed to us, rose the pie, very much mixed up and damaged, and after it scrambled Harris, tumbled, grubby, and wet. He had been sitting, without knowing it, on the very verge of a small gully, the long grass hiding it from view, and in leaning a little back, he had shot over, pie and all. He said he had never felt so surprised in all his life as when he first felt himself going, without being able to conjecture in the slightest what had happened. He thought at first that the end of the world had come. Harris believes to this day that George and I planned it all beforehand. Thus does unjust suspicion follow even the most blameless, for, as the poet says, who shall escape calumny? Who indeed? Chapter 14. We caught a breeze after lunch, which took us gently up past Wargrave and Shiplake. Mellowed in the drowsy sunlight of a summer's afternoon, Wargrave, nestling where the river bends, makes a sweet old picture as you pass it, and one that lingers long upon the retina of memory. The George and Dragon at Wargrave boasts a sign painted on the one side by Leslie, R.A., and on the other by Hodgson of that ilk. Leslie has depicted the fight. Hodgson has imagined the scene after the fight, George, the work done, enjoying his pint of beer. Day, the author of Sandford and Merton, lived, and, more credit to the place still, was killed at Wargrave. In the church is a memorial to Mrs. Sarah Hill, who bequeathed £1 annually to be divided at Easter between 2 boys and 2 girls who have never been undutiful to their parents, who have never been known to swear or to tell untruths, to steal or to break windows. Fancy giving up all that for 5 shillings a year. It is not worth it. It is rumoured in the town that once, many years ago, a boy appeared who really never had done these things, or at all events, which was all that was required or could be expected, had never been known to do them, and thus won the crown of glory. He was exhibited for 3 weeks afterwards in the town hall, under a glass case. What has become of the money since, no one knows. They say it is always handed over to the nearest waxworks show. Shiplake is a pretty village, but it cannot be seen from the river, being upon the hill. Tennyson was married in Shiplake Church. The river up to Sonning winds in and out through many islands, and is very placid, hushed, and lonely. Few folk, except at twilight a pair or two of rustic lovers, walk along its banks. Arry and Lord Fitznoodle have been left behind at Henley, and dismal dirty Reading is not yet reached. It is a part of the river in which to dream of bygone days, and vanished forms and faces, and things that might have been but are not, confound them. We got out at Sonning, and went for a walk round the village. It is the most fairy-like little nook on the whole river. It is more like a stage village than one built of bricks and mortar. Every house is smothered in roses, and now, in early June, they were bursting forth in clouds of dainty splendour. If you stop at Sonning, put up at the Bull behind the church. It is a veritable picture of an old country inn, with a green square courtyard in front, where, on seats beneath the trees, the old men group of an evening to drink their ale and gossip over village politics, with low, quaint rooms and latticed windows, and awkward stairs and winding passages. We roamed about sweet Sonning for an hour or so, and then, it being too late to push on past Reading, we decided to go back to one of the Shiplake Islands and put up there for the night. It was still early when we got settled, and George said that, as we had plenty of time, it would be a splendid opportunity to try a good slap-up supper. He said he would show us what could be done up the river in the way of cooking, and suggested that with the vegetables and the remains of the cold beef and general odds and ends, we should make an Irish stew. It seemed a fascinating idea. George gathered wood and made a fire, and Harris and I started to peel the potatoes. I should never have thought that peeling potatoes was such an undertaking. The job turned out to be the biggest thing of its kind that I had ever been in. We began cheerfully, one might almost say skittishly, but our light-heartedness was gone by the time the first potato was finished. The more we peeled, the more peel there seemed to be left on. By the time we had got all the peel off and all the eyes out, there was no potato left, at least none worth speaking of. George came and had a look at it. It was about the size of a peanut. He said, "Oh, that won't do, you're wasting them. You must scrape them." So we scraped them, and that was harder work than peeling. They are such an extraordinary shape, potatoes, all bumps and warts and hollows. We worked steadily for 25 minutes and did 4 potatoes. Then we struck. We said we should require the rest of the evening for scraping ourselves. I never saw such a thing as potato scraping for making a fellow in a mess. It seemed difficult to believe that the potato scrapings in which Harris and I stood, half smothered, could have come off 4 potatoes. It shows you what can be done with economy and care. George said it was absurd to have only 4 potatoes in an Irish stew, so we washed half a dozen or so more and put them in without peeling. We also put in a cabbage and about half a peck of peas. George stirred it all up, and then he said that there seemed to be a lot of room to spare, so we overhauled both the hampers and picked out all the odds and ends and the remnants and added them to the stew. There were half a pork pie and a bit of cold-boiled bacon left, and we put them in. Then George found half a tin of potted salmon, and he emptied that into the pot. He said that was the advantage of Irish stew. You got rid of such a lot of things. I fished out a couple of eggs that had got cracked and put those in. George said they would thicken the gravy. I forget the other ingredients, but I know nothing was wasted, and I remember that towards the end, Montmorency, who had evinced great interest in the proceedings throughout, strolled away with an earnest and thoughtful air, reappearing a few minutes afterwards with a dead water rat in his mouth, which he evidently wished to present as his contribution to the dinner. Whether in a sarcastic spirit or with a genuine desire to assist, I cannot say. We had a discussion as to whether the rat should go in or not. Harris said that he thought it would be all right mixed up with the other things, and that every little helped. But George stood up for precedent. He said he had never heard of water rats in Irish stew, and he would rather be on the safe side and not try experiments. Harris said, "If you never try a new thing, how can you tell what it's like? It's men such as you that hamper the world's progress. Think of the man who first tried German sausage." It was a great success, that Irish stew. I don't think I ever enjoyed a meal more. There was something so fresh and piquant about it. One's palate gets so tired of the old hackneyed things. Here was a dish with a new flavour, with a taste like nothing else on earth. And it was nourishing, too. As George said, there was good stuff in it. The peas and potatoes might have been a bit softer, but we all had good teeth, so that did not matter much. And as for the gravy, it was a poem. A little too rich, perhaps, for a weak stomach, but nutritious. We finished up with tea and cherry tart. Montmorency had a fight with the kettle during tea-time, and came off a poor second. Throughout the trip he had manifested great curiosity concerning the kettle. He would sit and watch it as it boiled with a puzzled expression, and would try and rouse it every now and then by growling at it. When it began to splutter and steam, he regarded it as a challenge, and would want to fight it, only at that precise moment someone would always dash up and bear off his prey before he could get at it. Today he determined he would be beforehand. At the first sound the kettle made, he rose, growling, and advanced towards it in a threatening attitude. It was only a little kettle, but it was full of pluck, and it up and spat at him. "Ah, would ye?" growled Montmorency, showing his teeth. "I'll teach ye to cheek, a hard-working, respectable dog, ye miserable, long-nosed, dirty-looking scoundrel, ye! Come on!" And he rushed at that poor little kettle and seized it by the spout. Then, across the evening stillness, broke a blood-curdling yelp, and Montmorency left the boat and did a constitutional 3 times round the island at the rate of 35 miles an hour, stopping every now and then to bury his nose in a bit of cool mud. From that day, Montmorency regarded the kettle with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and hate. Whenever he saw it, he would growl and back at a rapid rate, with his tail shut down, and the moment it was put upon the stove, he would promptly climb out of the boat and sit on the bank till the whole tea business was over. George got out his banjo after supper, and wanted to play it, but Harris objected. He said he had got a headache and did not feel strong enough to stand it. George thought the music might do him good, said music often soothed the nerves, and took away a headache. And he twanged 2 or 3 notes, just to show Harris what it was like. Harris said he would rather have the headache. George has never learned to play the banjo to this day. He has had too much all-round discouragement to meet. He tried on 2 or 3 evenings while we were up the river to get a little practice, but it was never a success. Harris's language used to be enough to unnerve any man, added to which Montmorency would sit and howl steadily right through the performance. It was not giving the man a fair chance. "What's he want to howl like that for when I'm playing?" George would exclaim indignantly, while taking aim at him with a boot. "What do you want to play like that for when he's howling?" Harris would retort, catching the boot. "You let him alone. He can't help howling. He's got a musical ear, and your playing makes him howl." So George determined to postpone study of the banjo until he reached home. But he did not get much opportunity even there. Mrs. P. used to come up and say she was very sorry. For herself, she liked to hear him, but the lady upstairs was in a very delicate state, and the doctor was afraid it might injure the child. Then George tried taking it out with him late at night and practising round the square. But the inhabitants complained to the police about it, and a watch was set for him one night, and he was captured. The evidence against him was very clear, and he was bound over to keep the peace for 6 months. He seemed to lose heart in the business after that. He did make 1 or 2 feeble efforts to take up the work again when the 6 months had elapsed, but there was always the same coldness, the same want of sympathy on the part of the world to fight against, and after a while he despaired altogether and advertised the instrument for sale at a great sacrifice, owner having no further use for same, and took to learning card tricks instead. It must be disheartening work, learning a musical instrument. You would think that society, for its own sake, would do all it could to assist a man to acquire the art of playing a musical instrument. But it doesn't. I knew a young fellow once who was studying to play the bagpipes, and you would be surprised at the amount of opposition he had to contend with. Why, not even from the members of his own family did he receive what you could call active encouragement. His father was dead against the business from the beginning, and spoke quite unfeelingly on the subject. My friend used to get up early in the morning to practice, but he had to give that plan up because of his sister. She was somewhat religiously inclined, and she said it seemed such an awful thing to begin the day like that. So he sat up at night instead, and played after the family had gone to bed. But that did not do, as it got the house such a bad name. People going home late would stop outside to listen, and then put it about all over town the next morning that a fearful murder had been committed at Mr. Jefferson's the night before, and would describe how they had heard the victim's shrieks and brutal oaths and curses of the murderer, followed by the prayer for mercy and the last dying gurgle of the corpse. So they let him practice in the daytime in the back kitchen with all the doors shut, but his more successful passages could generally be heard in the sitting-room in spite of these precautions, and it would affect his mother almost to tears. She said it put her in mind of her poor father. He had been swallowed by a shark, poor man, while bathing off the coast of New Guinea. That where the connection came in, she could not explain. Then they knocked up a little place for him at the bottom of the garden, about a quarter of a mile from the house, and made him take the machine down there when he wanted to work it. And sometimes a visitor would come to the house who knew nothing of the matter, and they would forget to tell him all about it and caution him, and he would go out for a stroll round the garden and suddenly get within earshot of those bagpipes without being prepared for it or knowing what it was. If he were a man of strong mind, it only gave him fits, but a person of mere average intellect it usually sent mad. There is, it must be confessed, something very sad about the early efforts of an amateur in bagpipes. I have felt that myself when listening to my young friend. They appear to be a trying instrument to perform upon. You have to get enough breath for the whole tune before you start. At least, so I gathered from watching Jefferson. He would begin magnificently with a wild, full, come-to-the-battle sort of a note that quite roused you. But he would get more and more piano as he went on, and the last verse generally collapsed in the middle with a splutter and a hiss. You want to be in good health to play the bagpipes. Young Jefferson only learnt to play 1 tune on those bagpipes, but I never heard any complaints about the insufficiency of his repertoire, none whatever. This tune was, "The Campbells are coming, hooray, hooray," so he said, though his father always held that it was the Bluebells of Scotland. Nobody seemed quite sure what it was exactly, but they all agreed that it sounded Scotch. Strangers were allowed 3 guesses, and most of them guessed a different tune each time. Harris was disagreeable after supper. I think it must have been the stew that had upset him. He is not used to high living. So George and I left him in the boat and settled to go for a mooch round Henley. He said he should have a glass of whisky and a pipe and fix things up for the night. We were to shout when we returned, and he would row over from the island and fetch us. "Don't go to sleep, old man," we said as we started. "Not much fear of that while this stew's on," he grunted as he pulled back to the island. Henley was getting ready for the regatta and was full of bustle. We met a goodish number of men we knew about the town, and in their pleasant company the time slipped by somewhat quickly, so that it was nearly 11 o'clock before we set off on our 4-mile walk home, as we'd learned to call our little craft by this time. It was a dismal night, coldish, with a thin rain falling, and as we trudged through the dark, silent fields, talking low to each other and wondering if we were going right or not, we thought of the cosy boat with the bright light streaming through the tight-drawn canvas, of Harris and Montmorency and the whisky, and wished that we were there. We conjured up the picture of ourselves inside, tired and a little hungry, of the gloomy river and the shapeless trees, and, like a giant glowworm underneath them, our dear old boat so snug and warm and cheerful. We could see ourselves at supper there, pecking away at cold meat and passing each other chunks of bread. We could hear the cheery clatter of our knives, the laughing voices filling all the space and overflowing through the opening out into the night. And we hurried on to realize the vision. We struck the towpath at length, and that made us happy, because prior to this we had not been sure whether we were walking towards the river or away from it, and when you are tired and want to go to bed, uncertainties like that worry you. We passed Shiplake as the clock was striking the 11:45, and then George said, thoughtfully, "You don't happen to remember which of the islands it was, do you?" "No," I replied, beginning to grow thoughtful too. "I don't. How many are there?" "Only 4, answered George. "It will be all right if he's awake." "And if not?" I queried, but we dismissed that train of thought. We shouted when we came opposite the first island, but there was no response, so we went to the second and tried there, and obtained the same result. "Oh, I remember now," said George. "It was the third one." And we ran on hopefully to the third one, and hallooed. No answer. The case was becoming serious. It was now past midnight. The hotels at Shiplake and Henley would be crammed, and we could not go round knocking up cottagers and householders in the middle of the night to know if they let apartments. George suggested walking back to Henley and assaulting a policeman, and so getting a night's lodging in the station house. But then there was the thought, suppose he only hits us back and refuses to lock us up? We could not pass the whole night fighting policemen. Besides, we did not want to overdo the thing and get 6 months. We despairingly tried what seemed in the darkness to be the 4th island, but met with no better success. The rain was coming down fast now, and evidently meant to last. We were wet to the skin, and cold and miserable. We began to wonder whether there were only 4 islands or more, or whether we were near the islands at all, or whether we were anywhere within a mile of where we ought to be, or in the wrong part of the river altogether. Everything looked so strange and different in the darkness. We began to understand the sufferings of the babes in the wood. Just when we had given up all hope— yes, I know that is always the time that things do happen in novels and tales, but I can't help it— I resolved when I began to write this book that I would be strictly truthful in all things. And so I will be, even if I have to employ hackneyed phrases for the purpose. It was just when we had given up all hope, and I must therefore say so. Just when we had given up all hope, then, I suddenly caught sight a little way below us of a strange, weird sort of glimmer flickering among the trees on the opposite bank. For an instant I thought of ghosts. It was such a shadowy, mysterious light. The next moment it flashed across me that it was our boat, and I set up such a yell across the water that made the night seem to shake in its bed. We waited breathless for a minute, and then— oh, divinest music of the darkness, we heard the answering bark of Montmorency. We shouted back loud enough to wake the 7 sleepers. I never could understand myself why it should take more noise to wake 7 sleepers than 1, and after what seemed an hour, but was really, I suppose, about 5 minutes, we saw the lighted boat creeping slowly over the blackness, and heard Harris's sleepy voice asking where we were. There was an unaccountable strangeness about Harris. It was something more than mere ordinary tiredness. He pulled the boat against a part of the bank from which it was quite impossible for us to get into it, and immediately went to sleep. It took us an immense amount of screaming and roaring to wake him up again, and put some sense into him, but we succeeded at last and got safely on board. Harris had a sad expression on him, so we noticed when we got into the boat. He gave you the idea of a man who'd been through trouble. We asked him if anything had happened, and he said, "Swans." It seemed we had moored close to a swan's nest, and soon after George and I had gone, the female swan came back and kicked up a row about it. Harris had chivied her off, and she had gone away and fetched up her old man. Harris said he'd had quite a fight with these two swans, but courage and skill had prevailed in the end, and he had defeated them. Half an hour afterwards they returned with 18 other swans. It must have been a fearful battle, so far as we could understand Harris's account of it. The swans had tried to drag him and Montmorency out of the boat and drown them, and he had defended himself like a hero for 4 hours, and had killed the lot, and they'd all paddled away to die. "How many swans did you say there were?" asked George. 32, replied Harris sleepily. "Oh, you said 18 just now," said George. "No, I didn't," grunted Harris. "I said 12. Think I can't count?" What were the real facts about these swans we never found out. We questioned Harris on the subject in the morning, and he said, "What swans?" and seemed to think that George and I had been dreaming. Oh, how delightful it was to be safe in the boat after our trials and fears. We ate a hearty supper, George and I, and we should have had some toddy after it if we could have found the whisky, but we could not. We examined Harris as to what he had done with it, but he did not seem to know what we meant by whisky, or what we were talking about at all. Montmorency looked as if he knew something, but said nothing. I slept well that night, and should have slept better if it had not been for Harris. I have a vague recollection of having been woken up at least a dozen times during the night by Harris wandering about the boat with the lantern, looking for his clothes. He seemed to be worrying about his clothes all night. Twice he routed up George and myself to see if we were lying on his trousers. George got quite wild the second time. "What the thunder do you want your trousers for in the middle of the night?" he asked indignantly. "Why don't you lie down and go to sleep?" I found him in trouble the next time I awoke, because he could not find his socks, and my last hazy remembrance is of being rolled over on my side and of hearing Harris muttering something about it being an extraordinary thing where his umbrella could have got to. Chapter 15. We woke late the next morning, and at Harris's earnest desire partook of a plain breakfast with non-dainties. Then we cleaned up and put everything straight, a continual labour which was beginning to afford me a pretty clear insight into a question that had often posed me, namely, how a woman with the work of only one house on her hands manages to pass away her time, and, at about 10, set out on what we had determined should be a good day's journey. We agreed that we would pull this morning as a change from towing, and Harris thought the best arrangement would be that George and I should scull, and he steer. I did not chime in with this idea at all. I said I thought Harris would be better, showing a more proper spirit, if he had suggested that he and George should work, and let me rest a bit. It seemed to me that I was doing more than my fair share of the work on this trip, and I was beginning to feel strongly on the subject. It always does seem to me that I am doing more work than I should do. It is not that I object to the work, mind you. I like work. It fascinates me. I can sit and look at it for hours. I love to keep it by me. The idea of getting rid of it nearly breaks my heart. You cannot give me too much work. To accumulate work has almost become a passion with me. My study is so full of it now that there is hardly an inch of room for any more. I shall have to throw out a wing soon. And I'm careful of my work, too. Why, some of the work I have by me now has been in my possession for years and years, and there isn't a finger mark on it. I take a great pride in my work. I take it down now and then, and dust it. No man keeps his work in a better state of preservation than I do. But, though I crave for work, I still like to be fair. I do not ask for more than my proper share. But I get it without asking for it, at least so it appears to me, and this worries me. George says he does not think I need trouble myself on the subject. He thinks it is only my over-scrupulous nature that makes me fear I am having more than my due, and that, as a matter of fact, I don't have half as much as I ought. But I expect he only says this to comfort me. In a boat, I have always noticed that it is the fixed idea of each member of the crew that he is doing everything. Harris's notion was that it was he alone who had been working, and that both George and I had been imposing upon him. George, on the other hand, ridiculed the idea of Harris's having done anything more than eat and sleep, and had a cast-iron opinion that it was he, George himself, who had done all the labour worth speaking of. He said he had never been out with such a couple of lazy skulks as Harris and I. That amused Harris. "Fancy old George talking about work," he laughed. "Why, about half an hour of it would kill him. Have you ever seen George work?" he added, turning to me. I agreed with Harris that I never had, most certainly not since we had started this trip. "Well, I don't see how you can know much about it one way or the other," George retorted to Harris, "for I'm blessed if you haven't been asleep half the time." "Have you ever seen Harris fully awake except at mealtimes?" asked George, addressing me. Truth compelled me to support George. Harris had been very little good in the boat, so far as helping was concerned, from the beginning. "Well, hang it all, I've done more than old J, anyhow," retorted Harris. "Well, you couldn't very well have done less," added George. "I suppose J thinks he's the passenger," continued Harris. And that was their gratitude to me, for having brought them and their wretched old boat all the way up from Kingston, and for having superintended and managed everything for them, and taken care of them and slaved for them. It is the way of the world. We settled the present difficulty by arranging that Harris and George should scull up past Reading, and that I should tow the boat on from there. Pulling a heavy boat against a strong stream has few attractions for me now. There was a time, long ago, when I used to clamour for the hard work. Now I like to give the youngsters a chance. I notice that most of the old river hands are similarly retiring whenever there's any stiff pulling to be done. You can always tell the old river hand by the way in which he stretches himself out upon the cushions at the bottom of the boat, and encourages the rowers by telling them anecdotes about the marvellous feats he performed last season. "Call what you're doing hard work," he drawls between his contented whiffs, addressing the two perspiring novices who have been grinding away steadily upstream for the last hour and a half. "Why, Jim, Biffles, and Jack and I last season pulled up from Marlow to Goring in one afternoon. Never stopped once. Do you remember that, Jack?" Jack, who has made himself a bed up in the prow of all the rugs and coats he can collect, and who's been lying there asleep for the last 2 hours, partially wakes up on being thus appealed to, and recollects all about the matter, and also remembers that there was an unusually strong stream against them all the way, likewise a stiff wind. "About 34 miles, I suppose it must have been," adds the first speaker, reaching down another cushion to put under his head. No, don't exaggerate, Tom," murmurs Jack reprovingly. 33 at the outside." And Jack and Tom, quite exhausted by this conversational effort, drop off to sleep once more, and the two simple-minded youngsters at the sculls feel quite proud of being allowed to row such wonderful oarsmen as Jack and Tom, and strain away harder than ever. When I was a young man, I used to listen to these tales from my elders, and take them in, and swallow them, and digest every word of them, and then come up for more. But the new generation do not seem to have the simple faith of the old times. We, George, Harris, and myself, took a roan up with us once last season, and we plied him with the customary stretchers about the wonderful things we had done all the way up. We gave him all the regular ones, the time-honoured lies that have done duty up the river with every boating man for years past, and added 7 entirely original ones that we had invented for ourselves, including a really quite likely story, founded to a certain extent on an all-but-true episode which had actually happened in a modified degree some years ago to friends of ours, a story that a mere child could have believed without injuring itself much. And that young man mocked at them all, and wanted us to repeat the feats then and there, and to bet us 10-to-1 that we didn't. We got to chatting about our rowing experiences this morning, and to recounting stories of our first efforts in the art of oarsmanship. My own earliest boating recollection is of 5 of us contributing threepence each and taking out a curiously constructed craft on the Regent's Park Lake, drying ourselves subsequently in the park keeper's lodge. After that, having acquired a taste for the water, I did a good deal of rafting in various suburban brickfields, an exercise providing more interest and excitement than might be imagined, especially when you're in the middle of the pond and the proprietor of the materials of which the raft is constructed suddenly appears on the bank with a big stick in his hand. Your first sensation on seeing this gentleman is that somehow or other you don't feel equal to company and conversation, and that, if you could do so without appearing rude, you would rather avoid meeting him, and your object is, therefore, to get off on the opposite side of the pond to which he is, and to go home quietly and quickly, pretending not to see him. He, on the contrary, is yearning to take you by the hand and talk to you. It appears that he knows your father and is intimately acquainted with yourself, but this does not draw you towards him. He says he'll teach you to take his boards and make a raft of them, but seeing that you know how to do this pretty well already, the offer, though doubtless kindly meant, seems a superfluous one on his part, and you are reluctant to put him to any trouble by accepting it. His anxiety to meet you, however, is proof against all your coolness, and the energetic manner in which he dodges up and down the pond so as to be on the spot to greet you when you land is really quite flattering. If he be of a stout and short-winded build, you can easily avoid his advances, but when he is of the youthful and long-legged type, a meeting is inevitable. The interview is, however, extremely brief, most of the conversation being on his part, your remarks being mostly of an exclamatory and monosyllabic order, and as soon as you can tear yourself away, you do so. I devoted some 3 months to rafting, and being then as proficient as there was any need to be at that branch of the art, I determined to go in for rowing proper, and joined one of the Lee boating clubs. Being out in a boat on the River Lee, especially on Saturday afternoons, soon makes you smart at handling a craft, and spry at escaping being run down by roughs or swamped by barges, and it also affords plenty of opportunity for acquiring the most prompt and graceful method of lying down flat at the bottom of the boat, so as to avoid being chucked out into the river by passing tow lines. But it does not give you style. It was not till I came to the Thames that I got style. My style of rowing is very much admired now. People say it is so quaint. George never went near the water until he was 16. Then he and 8 other gentlemen of about the same age went down in a body to Kew on Saturday with the idea of hiring a boat there and pulling to Richmond and back. One of their number, a shock-headed youth named Joskins, who had once or twice taken out a boat on the Serpentine, told them it was jolly fun, boating. The tide was running out pretty rapidly when they reached the landing stage, and there was a stiff breeze blowing across the river, but this did not trouble them at all, and they proceeded to select their boat. There was an 8-oared racing outrigger drawn up on the stage. That was the one that took their fancy. They said they'd have that one, please. The boatman was away, and only his boy was in charge. The boy tried to damp their ardour for the outrigger, and showed them 2 or 3 very comfortable-looking boats of the family party build. But those would not do at all. The outrigger was the boat they thought they would look best in. So the boy launched it, and they took off their coats and prepared to take their seats. The boy suggested that George, who even in those days was always the heavy man of any party, should be number 4. George said he should be happy to be number 4, and promptly stepped into bow's place, and sat down with his back to the stern. They got him into his proper position at last, and then the others followed. A particularly nervous boy was appointed Cox, and the steering principle explained to him by Joskins. Joskins himself took stroke. He told the others that it was simple enough. All they had to do was to follow him. They said they were ready, and the boy on the landing stage took a boat-hook and shoved them off. What then followed, George is unable to describe in detail. He has a confused recollection of having, immediately on starting, received a violent blow in the small of the back from the butt end of No. 5's skull, at the same time that his own seat seemed to disappear from under him by magic and leave him sitting on the boards. He also noticed, as a curious circumstance, that No. 2 was at the same instant lying on his back at the bottom of the boat, with his legs in the air, apparently in a fit. They passed under Kew Bridge, broadside, at the rate of 8 miles an hour, Joskins being the only one who was rowing. George, on recovering his seat, tried to help him, but on dipping his oar into the water, it immediately, to his intense surprise, disappeared under the boat and nearly took him with it. And then Cox threw both rudder lines overboard and burst into tears. How they got back, George never knew, but it took them just 40 minutes. A dense crowd watched the entertainment from Kew Bridge with much interest, and everybody shouted out to them different directions. 3 times they managed to get the boat back through the arch, and 3 times they were carried under it again, and every time Cox looked up and saw the bridge above him, he broke out into renewed sobs. George said he little thought that afternoon that he should ever come to really like boating. Harris is more accustomed to sea rowing than to river work, and says that, as an exercise, he prefers it. I don't. I remember taking a small boat out at Eastbourne last summer. I used to do a good deal of sea rowing years ago, and I thought I should be all right. But I found I had forgotten the art entirely. When one scull was deep down underneath the water, the other would be flourishing wildly about in the air. To get a grip of the water with both at the same time, I had to stand up. The parade was crowded with nobility and gentry, and I had to pull past them in this ridiculous fashion. I landed halfway down the beach and secured the services of an old boatman to take me back. I like to watch an old boatman rowing, especially one who has been hired by the hour. There is something so beautifully calm and restful about his method. It is so free from that fretful haste, that vehement striving that is every day becoming more and more the bane of 19th century life. He is not forever straining himself to pass all the other boats. If another boat overtakes him and passes him, it does not annoy him. As a matter of fact, they all do overtake him and pass him, all those that are going his way. This would trouble and irritate some people. The sublime equanimity of the hired boatman under the ordeal affords us a beautiful lesson against ambition and uppishness. Plain practical rowing of the get-the-boat-along order is not a very difficult art to acquire, but it takes a good deal of practice before a man feels comfortable when rowing past girls. It is the time that worries a youngster. "It's jolly funny," he says, as for the 20th time within 5 minutes he disentangles his sculls from yours. "I can get on all right when I'm by myself." To see 2 novices try to keep time with one another is very amusing. Bow finds it impossible to keep pace with Stroke, because Stroke rows in such an extraordinary fashion. Stroke is intensely indignant at this, and explains that what he's been endeavouring to do for the last 10 minutes is to adapt his method to Bow's limited capacity. Bow, in turn, then becomes insulted, and requests Stroke not to trouble his head about him, Bow, but to devote his mind to setting a sensible stroke. "Or shall I take Stroke?" he adds, with the evident idea that that would at once put the whole matter right. They splash along for another 100 yards, with still moderate success, and then the whole secret of their trouble bursts upon Stroke like a flash of inspiration. "I tell you what it is. You've got my sculls," he cries, turning to Bow. "Pass yours over." "Well, do you know, I've been wondering how it was I couldn't get on with these," answers Bow, quite brightening up, and most willingly assisting in the exchange. "Now we shall be all right." But they are not even then. Stroke has to stretch his arms nearly out of their sockets to reach his sculls now, while Bow's pair, at each recovery, hit him a violent blow in the chest. So they change back again, and come to the conclusion that the man has given them the wrong set altogether. And over their mutual abuse of this man, they become quite friendly and sympathetic. George said he had often longed to take to punting for a change. Punting is not as easy as it looks. As in rowing, you soon learn how to get along and handle the craft, but it takes long practice before you can do this with dignity and without getting the water all up your sleeve. One young man I knew had a very sad accident happen to him the first time he went punting. He had been getting on so well that he'd grown quite cheeky over the business, and was walking up and down the punt, working his pole with a careless grace that was quite fascinating to watch. Up he would march to the head of the punt, plant his pole, and then run along right to the other end, just like an old punter. Oh, it was grand. And it would all have gone on being grand if he had not, unfortunately, while looking round to enjoy the scenery, taken just one step more than there was any necessity for, and walked off the punt altogether. The pole was firmly fixed in the mud, and he was left clinging to it while the punt drifted away. It was an undignified position for him. A rude boy on the bank immediately yelled out to a lagging chum to hurry up and see a real monkey on a stick. I could not go to his assistance because, as ill luck would have it, we had not taken the proper precaution to bring out a spare pole with us. I could only sit and look at him. His expression as the pole slowly sank with him I shall never forget. There was so much thought in it. I watched him gently let down into the water, and saw him scramble out, sad and wet. I could not help laughing. He looked such a ridiculous figure. I continued to chuckle to myself about it for some time, and then it was suddenly forced in upon me that really I had got very little to laugh at when I came to think of it. Here was I, alone in a punt, without a pole, drifting helplessly down midstream, possibly towards a weir. I began to feel very indignant with my friend for having stepped overboard and gone off in that way. He might at all events have left me the pole. I drifted on for about a quarter of a mile, and then I came in sight of a fishing punt moored in midstream, in which sat two old fishermen. They saw me bearing down upon them, and they called out to me to keep out of their way. "I can't," I shouted back. "But you don't try," they answered. I explained the matter to them when I got nearer, and they caught me and lent me a pole. The weir was just 50 yards below. I'm glad they happened to be there. The first time I went punting was in company with 3 other fellows. They were going to show me how to do it. We could not all start together, so I said I would go down first and get out the punt, and then I could potter about and practice a bit until they came. I could not get a punt out that afternoon. They were all engaged, so I had nothing else to do but sit down on the bank, watching the river, and waiting for my friends. I had not been sitting there long before my attention became attracted to a man in a punt who, I noticed with some surprise, wore a jacket and cap exactly like mine. He was evidently a novice at punting, and his performance was most interesting. You never knew what was going to happen when he put the pole in. He evidently didn't know himself. Sometimes he shot upstream, and sometimes he shot downstream, and at other times he simply spun round and came up the other side of the pole, and with every result he seemed equally surprised and annoyed. The people about the river began to get quite absorbed in him after a while, and to make bets with one another as to what would be the outcome of his next push. In the course of time, my friends arrived on the opposite bank, and they stopped and watched him too. His back was towards them, and they only saw his jacket and cap. From this they immediately jumped to the conclusion that it was I, their beloved companion, who was making an exhibition of himself, and their delight knew no bounds. They commenced to chaff him unmercifully. I did not grasp their mistake at first, and I thought, how rude of them to go on like that, with a perfect stranger too. But before I could call out and reprove them, the explanation of the matter occurred to me, and I withdrew behind a tree. Oh, how they enjoyed themselves, ridiculing that young man. For 5 good minutes they stood there, shouting ribaldry at him, deriding him, mocking him, jeering at him. They peppered him with stale jokes. They even made a few new ones and threw them at him. They hurled at him all the private family jokes belonging to our set, and which must have been perfectly unintelligible to him. And then, unable to stand their brutal jibes any longer, he turned round on them, and they saw his face. I was glad to notice that they had sufficient decency left in them to look very foolish. They explained to him that they had thought he was someone they knew. They said they hoped he would not deem them capable of so insulting anyone except a personal friend of their own. Of course, their having mistaken him for a friend excused it. I remember Harris telling me once of a bathing experience he had at Boulogne. He was swimming about there near the beach when he felt himself suddenly seized by the neck from behind and forcibly plunged under water. He struggled violently, but whoever had got hold of him seemed to be a perfect Hercules in strength, and all his efforts to escape were unavailing. He had given up kicking and was trying to turn his thoughts upon solemn things, when his captor released him. He regained his feet and looked round for his would-be murderer. The assassin was standing close by him, laughing heartily, but the moment he caught sight of Harris's face as it emerged from the water, he started back and seemed quite concerned. "I really beg your pardon," he stammered confusedly, "but I took you for a friend of mine." Harris thought it was lucky for him the man had not mistaken him for a relation, or he would probably have been drowned outright. Sailing is a thing that wants knowledge and practice too, though as a boy I did not think so. I had an idea it came natural to a body, like rounders and touch. I knew another boy who held this view likewise, and so one windy day we thought we would try the sport. We were stopping down at Yarmouth, and we decided we would go for a trip up the Yare. We hired a sailing boat at the yard by the bridge, and started off. "It's rather a rough day," said the man to us as we put off. "Better take in a reef and luff sharp when you get round the bend." We said we would make a point of it, and left him with a cheery "good morning," wondering to ourselves how you luffed, and where we were to get a reef from, and what we were to do with it when we got it. We rowed until we were out of sight of the town, and then, with a wide stretch of water in front of us, and the wind blowing a perfect hurricane across it, we felt that the time had come to commence operations. Hector, I think that was his name, went on pulling while I unrolled the sail. It seemed a complicated job, but I accomplished it at length, and then came the question, which was the top end? By a sort of natural instinct, we, of course, eventually decided that the bottom was the top, and set to work to fix it upside down. But it was a long time before we could get it up either that way or any other way. The impression on the mind of the sail seemed to be that we were playing at funerals, and that I was the corpse, and itself was the winding sheet. When it found that this was not the idea, it hit me over the head with the boom and refused to do anything. "Wet it," said Hector. "Drop it over and get it wet." He said people in ships always wetted the sails before they put them up. So I wetted it, but that only made matters worse than they were before. A dry sail clinging to your legs and wrapping itself round your head is not pleasant, but when the sail is sopping wet, it becomes quite vexing. We did get the thing up at last, the two of us together. We fixed it, not exactly upside down, more sideways-like, and we tied it up to the mast with the painter, which we cut off for the purpose. That the boat did not upset, I simply state as a fact. Why it did not upset, I am unable to offer any reason. I have often thought about the matter since, but I have never succeeded in arriving at any satisfactory explanation of the phenomenon. Possibly the result may have been brought about by the natural obstinacy of all things in this world. The boat may possibly have come to the conclusion, judging from a cursory view of our behaviour, that we had come out for a morning suicide, and had thereupon determined to disappoint us. That is the only suggestion I can offer. By clinging like grim death to the gunwale, we just managed to keep inside the boat, but it was exhausting work. Hector said that pirates and other seafaring people generally lashed the rudder to something or other and hauled in the main topjib during severe squalls, and thought we ought to try to do something of the kind, but I was for letting her have her head to the wind. As my advice was by far the easiest to follow, we ended by adopting it, and contrived to embrace the gunwale and give her her head. The boat travelled upstream for about a mile at a pace I have never sailed at since, and don't want to again. Then, at a bend, she heeled over till half the sail was under water. Then she righted herself by a miracle and flew for a long, low bank of soft mud. That mud bank saved us. The boat ploughed its way into the middle of it and then stuck. Finding that we were once more able to move according to our ideas, instead of being pitched and thrown about like peas in a bladder, we crept forward and cut down the sail. We had had enough sailing. We did not want to overdo the thing and get a surfeit of it. We had had a sail, a good, all-round, exciting, interesting sail, and now we thought we would have a row, just for a change like. We took the sculls and tried to push the boat off the mud, and in doing so we broke one of the sculls. After that we proceeded with great caution, but they were a wretched old pair, and the second one cracked almost easier than the first, and left us helpless. The mud stretched out for about 100 yards in front of us, and behind us was the water. The only thing to be done was to sit and wait until someone came by. It was not the sort of day to attract people out on the river, and it was 3 hours before a soul came in sight. It was an old fisherman who, with immense difficulty, at last rescued us, and we were towed back in an ignominious fashion to the boatyard. What between tipping the man who had brought us home and paying for the broken sculls, and for having been out 4 hours and a half, it cost us a pretty considerable number of weeks' pocket money, that sail. But we learned experience, and they say that is always cheap, at any price.